Hello everyone, thanks for joining the webinar. Whilst you're joining, please let us know where you're joining from. Hi Waddy, Waddy's in Montreal. I'm hoping it's warmer over there, Waddy, but I'm not sure it will be. Hi Katarina, she's in Sweden, so that's probably cold too. Is there anyone coming in from the sunshine? What's it like with you, Jody, at the minute?
It's actually cold but sunny.
So Waddy's got beautiful weather, that's brilliant. Hi Liz. Hi Julia, nice to see you. So Waddy's asking you where you are, Jody, at the minute.
I'm in Idaho, in Sun Valley, Idaho in the US.
I thought you might say something like in my living room.
Yeah. That too, yeah.
Okay, we've got Hannah from Oxfordshire as well. So she's probably in the dark too, like me at the minute. And Julia, you'll be in the dark as well, unless you're somewhere else, I think. So Liz is in Tampa. Oh, it's gloomy and humid over there. Okay, so I think we'll start because there's quite a few people that have dropped in. So welcome wherever you are in the world to our Pictas webinar with the amazing adventure and documentary photographer Jody MacDonald. This webinar is sponsored by Vero True Social. So you may know Jody from the Vero community, where she shares her incredible photography. You may already have a Vero account. If not, we'd love to see you there, as it's a friendly and welcoming true social platform and community. So briefly, just before Jody starts, my name's Nikki and I'm part of the Pictas team, along with Harry and Matteo, who are also here today. For those of you that don't know about Pictas, we're an engaging and supportive community of photographers, artists and creators. We have a membership group, which you are all very welcome to join. I'm sure Matteo might drop a link for our website in the chat box. And also, Matteo, if you could add a link for the Vero True Social so that anyone that doesn't have an account can have a look and possibly join as well if they wish. We've got 12 active hubs on Vero, and you'll see all sorts of photography and art that we post on there. So a couple of important things about the webinar. If you've got any questions for Jody, please do not use the chat box. Please post them in the question and answer box, which you should find hopefully at the bottom of your screen. And Jody's going to answer the questions that you've got at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to now hand you over to Jody, who is going to tell you about her incredible career as an adventure and documentary photographer. Thanks, Jody.
Thanks so much for having me. Am I on focus now? Am I the focus?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Just checking. So hi everyone, I'm Jody MacDonald. I'm super excited that you joined today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my background and how I became a professional adventure and documentary photographer, and just some of the stories that I've worked on over the years that kind of brought attention to my work when I was growing and kind of helped me stand out kind of from the crowd. So I thought that would be a little helpful for any of you aspiring photographers. But I think the best place to start is probably from the beginning. I mean, look how cute I am. No, just kidding. I'm Canadian, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia. My dad worked for a Canadian telephone company, and the company got a contract to set up the telephone system there. And I moved at the age of 3. And one of the perks was free paid vacations. And my parents had never traveled anywhere. So every school holiday and break, my parents were like, we're going somewhere we've never been before, which was everywhere. So before I knew it, I had seen a big part of the world by the time I left Saudi at the age of 16. And this constant exposure to exotic places during my childhood really, really shaped me. I mean, early on, I got a glimpse into just how incredible the world is and how much there is to see and explore. And I remember, you know, I dreamt about having these adventures in these distant lands. Like I just really wanted to become like Indiana Jones. So yeah, this was a very, I think when people ask me where I get my travel bug from, I really think it's because of my childhood. But at 16, I went back to Canada and I finished high school. And my favorite classes in school were always art and sports. And when I finished high school, I had no idea what I wanted to take in college. And I remember that being really, really stressful. And I ended up finding a university that offered a degree in like a bachelor in outdoor recreation. There's one school in Canada where you can get a bachelor in outdoor recreation. And my parents were like, oh man, seriously? And I was like, well, it's the closest thing to anything that I'm interested in. So that's what I'm going to do. And this photo pretty much sums up what I did for 4 years in university, which was like camping and climbing and paddling. And it was during this time in university where I took my first photography elective. And I remember it was like lightning striking. I was like, oh my God, I can combine my passions of art and adventure by, taking a camera with me and all these amazing outdoor experiences I was having. And I just remember feeling like, oh my God, yes, it clicks. Like, and I didn't know where it would lead or what would happen, but I just was, following something that felt really good to me. And I ended up graduating from university, and again, not knowing what I wanted to do, I made my way to Alaska, and I ended up getting a job as a raft guide. And still always taking a camera with me, documenting my adventures. This is one of the earliest photos that I can remember with my film camera. And at this point, I had no idea I still wanted to be a photographer at all, because this was before social media, and I didn't know of anybody making a living as an adventure photographer. I just knew that I was totally in love with it, and then I was just kept trying to get better at it. I just was kind of infatuated with the process, and I did this for a couple of seasons, but it sounds really bad, but I got kind of tired of taking care of groups of people because it started interfering with my wanting to do photography. And I was getting frustrated that I had to like put down my camera to go kind of do stuff with, guiding and stuff like that. So, and then I also got burnt out. It was a tough job. I mean, I loved it, but it was a tough job. So I ended up quitting and not knowing what else to do. I thought I'm going to give in to societal pressures and move to the city and get, a real job. I was getting a lot of pressure from my parents and just, societal pressure that like what I was doing wasn't a real job. So, and I think somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that I had to give a 9-to-5 office job a chance so that if I wrote it off, like at least I had given it a try. So I moved to Vancouver, Canada, and I started working at Canada's largest outdoor retail company called Mountain Equipment Co-op. And if any of you are from the States or North America, it's kind of like Canada's equivalent of REI in the States. And I was working retail in one of their retail stores. And I met the photography editor, and I started asking him all these questions about the job and what it was like. And I was just really interested. And as luck would have it, he ended up leaving that job a few months later, and he put my name as a recommendation and told me to apply for the job. And I really don't think many people applied because I had no qualifications, but somehow I got this job as a photography editor. And this is a page out of the catalog. It's a lot like a Patagonia catalog for those of you who kind of know the Patagonia catalogs. But this job ended up being really valuable learning experience for me for what I would do later as a photographer. Here I got to learn like the editorial side of the industry, how many images are ideal to submit to an editor, how to critique images, what makes a good image. When you're looking at hundreds of submissions of photos, you start to, refine your eye really quickly into what makes a good image and why. And I often tell people this story about my time working as an editor because it really stuck with me. But I used to go to parties and people would ask, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a photo editor at Mountain Equipment Co-op." And people would be like, "Oh, wow, I just did this amazing backcountry ski trip and I have these incredible photos. Can I submit them to you?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, send them in." But I learned very quickly that if anybody who said that to me, when I looked at their pictures weren't very good. And the people who didn't rave about how good their images were, who sent me pictures, they were often way better submissions. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I came to realize that, people aren't critiquing their own work enough. And so that had really sat with me, and was also a really interesting lesson that I learned. But I worked there for a few years, and I started to become frustrated that I was like stuck in an office, and I was staring at these photos of all these people having these amazing adventures. And then on top of that, I was dating this very adventurous bush pilot, and he did fly-in surf trips, and he was a paraglider, and he was this really big outdoorsy guy. And I remember he used to come visit me because he didn't live in Vancouver, but he used to come visit me, and he would tell me that this job was sucking my soul, and that, I needed to quit. And, that he was like, "You should quit, and we can do a road trip down the West Coast, and you can take some time, what you want to do next. But you got to get out of this job." And by this point, yeah, I had been doing it a few years, and I wasn't really learning or challenging myself anymore. And yeah, I was just it was a very cush job, and I really felt that my parents were super stoked about it. But I remember thinking to myself, I can see myself like 1 year becoming 10 years, and my whole life just passing me by. And it just really, really scared the crap out of me. So I was like, I want to go do what, I want to be taking these pictures in the outdoors. I don't want to be stuck in here editing. So I quit my job, gave up my apartment. And I remember it was my last day of work. And I think I was supposed to be done at like 2 o'clock or something. And I got a phone call at 12 o'clock saying that my friend telling me that my boyfriend had died that morning in a paragliding accident. So as you can imagine, it was a huge, huge shock to the system, and specifically at this juncture in my life. And my friends and my family were telling me, "You should take your job back, you should get your apartment back," and all this stuff. And I was thinking, you know what, I can't. It's, for me, that's moving backwards. I need to move forwards. And so I decided I was going to do what we had planned to do. And I went down the West Coast and took a few months to grieve. And I, spent time in the outdoors. I was paragliding and surfing and just kind of doing, just trying to process everything. And looking back, why I'm telling you this story is because it was actually a very critical time in my life, because I often say now that his death was actually one of my greatest gifts, because it just gave me this profound realization that, like, life is so short. And, I just wanted to really pursue what things that, that were fulfilling to me and like got me inspired. And it was just this overwhelming lesson that I didn't want to kind of like squander my life. And so that was a really profound moment that I keep thinking of often throughout the years. But yeah, it was kind of a life-changing experience. And so while I was doing this road trip, I met someone who offered me an opportunity to start sailing in the South Pacific to help run boat charters. And I didn't know anything about sailing, but I knew I couldn't pass up this opportunity. I knew that I could always come home and get a job anywhere, McDonald's, I don't know. But I couldn't always get the chance to start sailing in the South Pacific. So I flew to New Zealand. I spent a couple of months in a boatyard helping them get the boat ready for the season in the South Pacific. And our first passage was from New Zealand to Vanuatu, and then Vanuatu to Fiji. And I did a TEDx talk online about this first sailing experience that you can watch online, but it was a complete nightmare scenario. I mean, we got caught in an 8-day storm. We almost got demasted, which means we almost lost our mast. I didn't eat. I got vomited on. We almost had to get rescued, and the boat had about $40,000 worth of damage. So we literally limped into Fiji. And at this time, I also found out that I got incredibly seasick. And so this is a pretty typical photo of me at sea. The seas aren't rough here, so I'm probably recovering from seasickness. But yeah, this is a pretty common sight. But despite this really, really horrible first sailing experience, I ended up sailing for 10 more years, which means I was pretty much seasick for a decade. And you have to be asking, I'm sure you're wondering why the hell I would do that. And I'm not going to lie, when it was the only thing on my mind during that trip, that when we got to Fiji, I was going to get on a plane and I was going to come back to North America, and I was like, this is the worst experience of my life. What the hell am I doing? But when I got to shore, I needed a few days to recuperate and rest and eat and all that stuff. And I started thinking about that, like the thought of going home and giving up. I knew I would regret it. And I think I was like, I haven't given this enough of a try. And this notion of exploration by sailboat for me called to me so deeply that the idea of just kind of being seasick and nauseous was just like a necessary evil to make it happen. But I think I just was more scared of the regret as well. So yeah, I decided to keep going. And why I kept sailing for 10 years was because I ended up starting with somebody else. I had a business partner, but we ended up starting a global kiteboarding expedition business, specializing in remote locations around the world, which is a totally other story. I could do a whole other webinar on it. And we started it from nothing. I mean, I had $200 to my name. I had really no money, but I was already kind of at ground zero, so I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And more importantly was that it could allow me to keep the exploration going. And at this time, I also saw this as an incredible opportunity to start taking my photography seriously. And in retrospect, I would say this is probably the beginning of my photography career. In the beginning, I tried to shoot everything I could around me. I was completely inspired by what I was seeing, like the remote cultures we were experiencing, like these kids in the Solomon Islands. And this is one of my first film photographs that I can remember taking. Of course, completely inspired and by the magic of the ocean. So I got really excited about documenting the stuff I was seeing in the oceans. And of course, the kiteboarding and the surfing adventures that we were having in these incredible places. So I had so much inspiration, and I thought, if this is what I want to do, the time is now to really try to take it seriously. And at the same time, I was not only taking pictures of everything that I could, but I was also trying to experiment with different techniques and ways to tell stories through my photographs. And this is one of my first over-under images that I remember I was really proud of. And it's kind of interesting for me to look at this image again, because it really reminds me of that time where I was just, trying to get better and progress. And this was kind of like a photo that kind of summarizes that time and kind of feel like I'm slightly succeeding, or at least getting better at it. But we often had professional athletes on board, and this became a really great opportunity for me to progress my skills. And I started submitting photos to kiteboarding magazines and just trying to get published. my first published photos was an article I did for a kiteboarding magazine from one of our trips. And this is it. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, maybe I can do this. I don't know how many of you have been published, but that when you first get published, it's just like this, it's just this overwhelming feeling like, maybe I don't suck as bad as I think I do. So I kept taking more photos, submitting them, getting a ton of rejection. But slowly more of my images were becoming published, but mostly in kiteboarding magazines, because that's what we were primarily doing. This was my first cover that I remember. And I was also submitting images for ads for like sunglass companies and sunscreen companies, basically just anyone who I thought that would take them that was relevant to what I was doing. And I quickly realized that editors were in need of unique content. And then I was in a kind of a cool position to provide it because I was in these unique situations. And I continued to do this whole setup and system and for a number of years. But as my photography got better, taking pictures of athletes started not quite to be enough for me. I began wanting to photograph stories that had a little bit more depth to them. And I think it was because I was bearing witness to how quickly the oceans were degrading and how fast the corals, I could see kind of getting wiped out, and how much plastic pollution was going on in the oceans. And it was so overwhelming, and I can't really, it's so hard to describe to you the feeling where, you sail somewhere in the open ocean for days and you get to the super remote island that you think is beautiful and pristine, and you walk up to it and it's got plastic on it like this. Like, it's just so disheartening and gut-wrenching. And I don't know if it's possible to witness these changes and not feel compelled to do something about it. And I think also, in comparing it to what, I was doing was just taking pictures of these people having, these ventures in these pretty places. And I think it started to also make me feel a bit guilty about some of the stuff I was doing. But this is when I started to get interested in telling stories that go beyond adventure. And they didn't necessarily need to be environmental. They just needed to have more substance to them. So I wanted to start telling stories of villagers that I was encountering on these islands that were becoming, starting to become displaced because of climate change, or, the plight of the whales and the depletion of the fish stocks that I was seeing. So in between trips, I started hopping off the boat to try to look for some of these stories and try to find some of these personal projects that had a little bit more depth to them, which led me to my story of Rajan, the swimming elephant. Some of you may recognize this image. It's probably my most famous image that I've ever taken. And it was how it all started. It was 2010, and I was on the boat watching this Hollywood movie called The Fall. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a pretty obscure movie, but in the movie, it features a 3.5 ton Asian elephant swimming in this clear, crystal, tropical blue water. And I remember the scene so well. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, this is so visually cool and amazing. But like, is it a Hollywood set? Like, is this real? Like, what is going on here? And I think like why it puzzled me so much is because at this point I'd sailed around a lot of the world and been to a ton of places. And I was like, where is there elephants hanging out by the ocean in tropical blue water? Like, it couldn't compute in my brain. And so, yeah, it really struck me. And I remember thinking, I just want to go, if this is real, I want to go experience this. And so the next time I went to shore, I went onto Google, and I ended up finding on the internet that this elephant really did exist and that he lived in the Andaman Islands off the coast of India. And as luck would have it, we were going to be sailing into the Andamans a few months later. And so I was like, that's it. I'm going to go find this elephant. And we made it to the Andamans, and this is a remote chain of islands, which is the southeast corner of India, and it lies between the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. And I got off in Port Blair, and I just started island hopping, and I knew that I would probably find him pretty quickly, just because if you ask people like, where can I find the swimming elephant, I'm pretty sure most people would know where that was in this small group, island group. And so I ended up finding him on one of these islands, and I didn't know his name, which is obviously Rajan, and he was 61 years old when I found him. And the more I found out about his story, the more intrigued I became. And I was just like, this is an incredible story. And I found out that the government of India started logging the Andamans in the 1970s. And and this is a picture of what these beautiful trees on these islands look like, which is, why they were logging them. But they had no way to get these cut logs to the barges that were anchored off the coast of the island. And so they brought in a group of 10 elephants, and they brutally trained them to swim in the ocean. Now, elephants love fresh water, but they don't love salt waters, which is why they had to force them to learn to like it. And these are some of the original photographs from when they first put this group of 10 elephants on the boat to take over to the Andamans. And so after they not only needed these elephants to swim these cut logs to the barges, but after they were done logging an island, they had no way to get the elephants then to the next island to log. So then these elephants would swim in a line, maybe like 5-6 miles to the next island to help log the next island, which is incredible to think about. I mean, I would have loved to have photographed that. And this group of elephants worked together until logging was finally banned in the islands in the early 2000s. And so it essentially put them out of work. And 9 of these elephants were dispersed. They were mostly sold to temples on the mainland. And by the time that I arrived and I asked people about it, everybody thought that like the 9 other elephants were dead. So apparently Rajan was the last of this group to survive and was living out his retirement, on the islands that he used to log with his mahout named Najru, which is this man here. And a mahout is the name Indians call domesticated elephant caretakers. And these mahouts usually care for elephants for their lifetime, unless they, sell the elephant and they pass it on. But so their bonds are really, really incredibly strong. And so I spent 2 weeks with them, just following Rajan's natural rhythms. Like if he wanted to swim, I'd follow him in the water. And when he'd roam in the jungle, I'd just trail behind them. But I just was watching and documenting this bond between Najru and Rajan. And it literally was like, father and child. It was this incredibly beautiful love story. And it's amazing to see an animal that is so, so, so intelligent. I think, more than we can comprehend, have this relationship with this human in it kind of felt like in such an unusual way. But yeah, I fell in love with the story, and for me, it was just incredible. It really did feel like fed my soul. And one night I was having dinner, and I started talking to this foreign woman who was sitting near me. And she was asking me, "Oh, what are you doing in the Andamans?" And I was telling her, "Oh, I'm a photographer, and I'm shooting this actually really interesting story about this elephant and his caretaker." And she ended up being a producer for the BBC and said, "Oh, I would love to run this story." So it came out in the BBC, and the photos at the time went viral. And this was also my first big break with National Geographic, because this is when they took some of the images and published it in the magazine. But this story not only got a lot of recognition and kind of like elevated my photography exposure, but it really showed me that pursuing my curiosity paid off. And I got so excited about it, and I just decided that I wanted to try to do this for, obviously for more projects, for future projects. And yeah, so, but I was still running the sailboat, and I couldn't just do Rajan stories full time because, well, I was running the sailboat, but they're really hard to find. Stories like that don't come along very often. So yeah, and as you can imagine, as we were sailing, we had a ton of adventures, but we also had a ton of misadventures over the years. This is an image of us stuck on, one of the many sandbars we've been stuck on. But yeah, we hit reefs, had shark attacks, had close calls with pirates. But sometimes the misadventures were like magic. Like the time we sailed 600 miles across the Mozambique Channel from Madagascar to an island group located off the southeast coast of Mozambique called the Bazaruto Archipelago. And this group is considered to be one of the most beautiful destinations in the African continent. And upon our arrival, this was the photo from us first arriving to the island. We could see this 20-mile pristine sand dune that appeared like as if out of a mirage. And it just so happened that all of us on board were also paraglider pilots. And I don't remember the odds of that or how that, I think it was just luck. But because we were all paraglider pilots, we just looked at each other and we were like, oh my God, we have to fly this dune. So we came up to the base of the dune, but we quickly figured out that getting to the dune was extremely difficult. And in this picture, you can see a very small shore break there, but it's actually very, very big. And so, which kind of denies beach access. So we plotted our attack at low tide, and in order to do that, we had to move the big boat way around to the backside of the dune, which was quite a few miles away. And then at low tide, we came back with our dinghy, and we were able to dump off the gear. But we decided that having the dinghy on shore wasn't an option because the tide levels were changing so much, and you would have had to pull the dinghy way up to the base of the dune, which was actually a huge distance, and we didn't want to do that. So we swam the dinghy out past the break, and we just anchored it, and we left it left it in the water. And we ended up, had perfect conditions, ended up flying, and we were just like, it was just this magical, incredible experience. We were in heaven. We thought, we must be the first people to fly this dune, and we had it all to ourselves. And how paragliding works on a dune like this is that you have this laminar air, we call laminar air, but it's like wind that's coming off the ocean. And when it's strong enough, it hits the base of the dune, which at a 90-degree angle, and then has nowhere to go. So it goes up and creates this lift band. And that's what we fly in. We fly in this lift band. And depending on the wind speed, that band can get quite strong. That lift band is quite strong. So as you can see in this photo, I'm taking this picture, and I'm probably like 500 feet above this dune, flying below. So yeah, you can really get these like massive height, which is kind of unexpected. But yeah, we would fly out over the water, and it was just we were having the time of our lives. And this is just a short video to give you an idea of what it was like. Yeah, so we flew for a few more hours, and then the light for me just got better and better, and it was just dancing across the dunes, and it was just really incredible for photography. And I just like the conditions couldn't have been more perfect until someone spotted our dinghy washed up on the beach, which meant that the anchor chain for the dinghy broke. And now, for those of you who've ever been sailing or anything, having your dinghy get wrecked or losing your dinghy is a huge ordeal, especially when you're in really remote locations, because it literally is your lifeline. It's how you get to and from the boat. It's how you get provisions. It's kind of, it's a very big deal. And so we were like, oh shit, this is really not good. And so we went and landed, checked out the dinghy, but we had it looked all fine, but we had no way of checking the engine because it needed to be in the water. But at this point, it was high tide again, so we were stuck. We were like, we can't get out through the beach break. So we decided that we had to wait for low tide again, which was the next morning. And by this point, we'd already drank the little water we had and the little food we had. So we didn't really know what else to do. So we just kept flying until the sun went down. And then we ended up having to sleep in our wings that night, which is actually pretty cold. But yeah, and we slept in the wings and then waited for low tide that morning. And we were able, anticlimactically, we were able to, this was the actual picture of the dinghy. I don't know why I took such a shitty photo of the dinghy, but anyway. Yeah, we were able to get the engine started and we made it off the beach. But as soon as we got to the big boat, the engine exploded. And I don't know, we got really, really lucky. But this was definitely one of my highlights of the 10 years that I lived at sea, because even though it was just like a 24-hour episode, it really was the epitome of why we were sailing around the world to begin with. Like why we put so much blood, sweat, and tears into creating this business was to have moments just like this, where, you have the adversity and the adventure and remoteness, and share it with people that your friends, and it was just this magical moment that I'll cherish forever. And the couple of those images from this this kind of little episode ended up being finalists for a Red Bull Illume contest, so which also brought more attention to my work. So at this point, I'm in my photography career. I'm getting a lot more work published, not only Rajan for BBC, but also bigger stories. I did a couple stories for Outside Magazine and National Geographic. And as you can see, it's been like a slow build of getting my work published in more prominent magazines. And this kept going until I finished sailing around 5 years ago. And I'm super, super excited to not be seasick anymore. Since then, I've kept paragliding and doing expeditions around the world, and focus on stories in remote places. And mostly just, I hope to shed light on how incredible our planet is, and hopefully inspire people to want to protect it. But I've also started doing a lot more commercial work with brands like Red Bull and Patagonia, and various magazine and online outlets. But this is one image from a Red Bull paragliding expedition that I did in Alaska a few years ago called North of Nome. But I've also joined environmental nonprofits like Sea Legacy and Only One, that was started by Nat Geo photographers Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, to focus more on cultural and environmental stories, like the Bajau Sea Gypsies of Borneo that I did, that are some of the last seafaring sea gypsies on the planet, and documenting how their livelihoods are under threat due to overfishing. And I did this other story on the sustainable fishing practices of the Imregrin fishermen of Mauritania, which I ended up photographing for Leica. which brings me to my first Leica photo project that I think a lot of people ask me about, which is one of the reasons I wanted to share it today. But this was my train hopping story that I did in the Sahara. And I was lucky enough to be asked by Leica. They came to me and they said, we have this new all-weather camera called the Leica XU, and we want you to take it somewhere in the world and in harsh conditions and take it on an adventure. And I knew pretty much right away exactly where I was going to take it. The only thing I was nervous about was Leica looking up what the travel restrictions for Mauritania was, because if you Googled Mauritania, and I'm pretty sure it's still the case today, but it's considered a red zone because of the terrorist activity on the border of Mali. But yeah, so I was super excited, pitched this story to Leica, and I'm glad nobody Googled it, because they said you can totally do it, and I super excited. But why I knew about this story was because it'd been on my bucket list for a very long time. I had this kiteboarding friend of mine do it a few years before while he was traveling through the west coast of Africa looking for remote kiteboarding locations. And he had hopped on this train to get to the coast and had filmed this video, and he'd showed it to me. And I was like, oh my God, I have to do this. This looks like such an amazing adventure. So that's what I did. I needed an assistant, and I needed a male with me. So I ended up bringing my brother, who also spoke French, which was necessary for, well, not necessary, but extremely helpful in Mauritania. But as a single female, I couldn't travel by myself. So I needed a male with me. So I ended up bringing my brother, and our plan to start was to start in the capital of Nouakchott and head into the interior of the desert, where the train originates out of this iron ore mine, and then hop on the train in the middle of the desert, and then head to the coast and try to find some remote surf breaks that were around these old shipwrecks that were off the coast in that area. And that's why we ended up bringing the surfboard with us, which if any of you were asking why we had a surfboard, it was because we were trying to get to surf on the coast. But so we spent 3 days heading into the desert towards this small town called Choum, which is located just south of where this iron ore mine is. And along the way, we, stopped in these amazing villages that were, kind of long lost villages that were slowly being taken over by the desert. And we also ended up getting caught in the worst sandstorm of my life. The winds picked up so strongly that if you had any exposed skin, it was just like getting all scratched. It felt like sandpaper on your skin, and it was just kind of unbearable. But it even smashed the back window of the truck we were in, and you can see some broken glass in the upper corner there. But so just trying to get to this railroad track, we had some pretty really fun adventures to get there. But we finally made it to the town Choum, and we got dropped off at the railroad tracks. We knew nothing about this train. We knew nothing about the schedule. We were just asking locals, like, where do we go? And we got dropped off in, this track, like, it just was in the middle of nowhere. And we started asking these few people who were kind of lingering around the tracks, like, do you know when the train's going to show up? And everybody was like, I don't know, maybe in a couple hours, but nobody knew for sure. And so we just waited there, and slowly families showed up, and goats and their boxes and their various goods. And so other people were hopping the train, locals. And just to be clear, this is not a passenger train. This is a train. It's considered one of the world's longest trains, but it is purely for iron ore that comes out of the mine to deliver it to the coast. And it's the shortcut through the desert. So if you want to get to this town that we were headed to, you would have had to go by road. You'd have to travel probably a week just to get around the Sahara to get to that town. So, but this train will cut through the desert and get you there much quicker. And these people would hop it to kind of get a free ride. And so we were waiting there and had all these cool experiences with these people that were waiting by the tracks. And finally, the train shows up at 1 a.m, and we have got our headlamps on, and the train doesn't actually stop because it's not a passenger train. It just slows down through these towns. And so we were running with our gear and our headlamps and, trying to just kind of pick any car and get on it as fast as you can, because you really don't know when it's going to speed up again. And we were trying to get I don't have any pictures from that night, but we had, just trying to get a sense of our surroundings, and everything's kind of covered in this grease and oil. And we made this makeshift bed. Fortunately, we brought some foam mats that we had bought in town and brought them with us, which was really great because you're lying on this jagged iron ore. So it was really good, but it was so loud and extremely cold. I was wearing all my clothes. I couldn't believe how cold it got in the desert, but so we couldn't sleep at all that night, just super, super loud. And the other thing that happens is this train is so long that when it slows down or speeds up, the trains violently bang together because it to kind of compensate and try to pick up or slow down with the speed. So, I felt like every minute or so there'd be this, just this huge bang and abrupt jerk that, there's definitely no sleeping going on. And then when you wake up in the morning and you finally get to see what's going on around you, you realize that the dust from the iron ore, so this is a piece of the iron ore, but has seeped into all your clothing, staining everything like a rusty red hue. And it's super abrasive dust too. So it starts wearing on all your clothes. And we had to wear ski goggles to protect our eyes and, scarves to try to minimize breathing it in. But this is a video of what it's like. So different than what the picture makes it look so peaceful almost, and it's not at all. And so this is what I look like after 17 hours on the train. It was kind of crazy. But the other thing I wanted to say about this project was that I had to shoot everything with one fixed lens because this Leica XU camera only has it's one lens. You can't interchange the lenses. And this was a huge learning experience for me, and I urge all of you to try it if you have to do a project or something, because if you spend a couple weeks only shooting with one lens, it definitely makes you a better photographer. I mean, at first I was like, oh God, this is going to be really challenging, and then you just get used to it and you adapt. But it definitely was a really good photography exercise for me. Anyway, we finally made it to the coast of Nuadhibu, where we found some shipwrecks and these amazing abandoned villages, and we did end up finding some surf. It was very small when we were there, unfortunately, but we were able to surf among some of these shipwrecks. And it was a really, really fun adventure. And the cameras, I ended up having two cameras. They gave me two. One is a backup. One of them failed pretty early on in the trip, and I was worried that the second one was going to fail. Like, they were prototypes. They weren't the final product. But I was able to keep the second camera alive and finish the project. So it ended up working really well. But I think we're close to maybe running out of time, but I wanted to share these three stories in particular because these three stories in different ways were ones that elevated my photography career. And I think they're really good examples of when you're trying to make your work stand out in this sea of content. I think it's really important to take risks and follow your gut and your curiosity and try to shoot stuff that not everyone's seen before. And I mean, you know, that may sound really obvious, but I see so many people taking the same images these days. And I'm not saying you have to go to these remote locations. I think great stories can be found anywhere. But I think you got to do them in a way that hasn't really been seen before. And more importantly, photograph a story that really means something to you. I mean, if I think back at why these three stories got me so much exposure, I think it's because I really felt like these were experiences that I had to do, and I really didn't care about the outcome. And I didn't really care about anything else. I was just like, I have to go do that. I have to go experience that. And as a result, I think the photographs are better. And I think, you know, that I think that's kind of like the secret into why these images kind of did well for me. And I think it's a great reminder. I try to keep thinking about that when I'm working on projects now. I'm kind of like, you know, does it have these elements to it? And does it kind of like what's my connection to it? Does it feed my curiosity? And does it do those things? So yeah, that's my advice to you. I don't know if we're doing any Q&A now, but I just wanted to thank you for listening to a few of these stories. And yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Jody. That was incredible, and a really personal webinar, Jody. I just had chills when you shared about your partner's death and the gift within such a heartbreaking situation. And I mean, oh my God, 10 years of being seasick. I've been seasick for a few hours, and that was enough. I can't imagine what you've been through with that.
Well, I think that's a testament to how much I want to explore.
Yeah. And also the thing for me was talking about intuition, because for me, it's a massive part of creativity. And it was great to see, you know, how you follow that intuition when it comes to you. With Rajan, you found the BBC producer, and kind of like the rest is history with that one. And then big highlights for me, you know, my heart was in my mouth with the dinghy. And I thought, oh, they're going to have no dinghy, then they're sleeping in the wings, then the engine exploded, and then casually at the beginning you said, oh yeah, we had some close call with pirates.
I'm
thinking, oh my God.
And sharks. I've got some good shark stories too.
Oh my God. Oh my God. So that was truly inspirational. Thank you so much. I'm sure everybody here has really enjoyed it, and I think we've got some questions for you.
Yeah, I'd love to answer some questions.
So Suzanne is asking, what type of lens did you have with you? And if you could pick, if you could choose one lens, which focal length would you pick?
Yeah, I would pick anywhere between like a 28 and 35. And I think that lens is a great storytelling lens. And if you go wider than that, you end up getting distortion in the lens, which kind of alters reality and kind of changes the, you know, the realism of the image. So you don't kind of want to get away from distortion. And then, so that lens is like, for me, the perfect storytelling lens. And it's really challenging to compositionally make images work within that focal length, because you really got to think about layers and depth, and you got to think about how they all work together. So it's a super challenging focal length, but it's so rewarding when it works out. And often photos taken with that focal length have a lot more feeling and emotion because they are storytelling. It's a storytelling focal length. Whereas if you go zoom, I mean, I do use zoom lenses sometimes because I have to, but they're a lot less interesting for me. I kind of feel like I'm cheating, and there's just not a lot of challenge in a zoom lens for me. So yeah, that's like kind of like my range of you know, I probably use that focal length, you know, 80% of the time, 75 to 80% of the time. So yeah.
Cool, thank you. So what he's asking, what focal length would you suggest for a prime lens?
Oh, I think yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you're shooting with the prime lens. I mean, if you're gonna focus on portraiture, then like an 85 is good, or a 50 is good. And then if you want to tell like more of these, storytelling, the wider images, then, I would go with like a 35 or 28, or yeah, something like that. But it really just depends what you want to do with that, what like the main focus of your photography is.
Cool, thank you. I hope that's answered your question, Waddy. Liz is asking, are you allowed to share your favorite brand equipment?
Yeah, I'm allowed to share. These days I use Canon and Leica. I just kind of feel each camera has their place. I mean, I think when I'm doing action adventure, the Canon makes so much more sense for me because they have like a high frame rate, and I know I can get the shot with the Canon lens. But Leica, I absolutely love for travel, and because they force you to slow down. There's like a love affair with the Leica camera, and I find like the images are more soulful, and you just got to like kind of work harder to get the imagery with the Leica. So, um, yeah, they each have their role, but I mean, I think if I, during my general travels, if I could travel with a camera, it would be a Leica. Yeah.
That sounds cool. That sounds cool. Okay, so we are at the end of the questions that have been typed in. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question, and we could maybe even open you up so that you can use the microphone?
Yeah. Any questions? Come on, bring them on.
You can raise your hand, I believe, if you want to ask a question, and we can open them up. Let me have a look at the bottom to see. Oh, thanks what he's saying. Very inspiring stories. They are very inspiring.
No one.
No, I don't think we have. So I just would like to say thank you so much to Jody, because that was incredible. I'd also like to thank Vero True Social for their sponsorship in allowing Pictas to bring this amazing webinar with just an amazing creator. It was brilliant. Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining. Hopefully we'll see you again soon with a Vero True Social sponsored webinar with Ben Staley. I think that's on Saturday, the 3rd of December. So nothing else to say other than thank you again, Jody.
Yeah, thank you
everyone for attending, and we will see you soon.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Great weekend, guys. Bye.
Bye.